Hello, friend. Today I've got a real treat for you. We have one of our favorite guests, Tracie Ibrahim. Now, Tracie is a therapist who does ERP. She's also the Chief Compliance Officer at NOCD. But more importantly, she has some personal experience. Tracie and her children are both learning how to live a life with OCD. So let's dig right in. Welcome to the Free Me from OCD podcast. If you or someone you love has OCD, you know that OCD can hold you hostage. OCD can get in the driver's seat of your life. Here you'll find information, tips, and tools to put you back in the driver's seat of your life. I'm Dr. Vicki Rackner, your host. Let's dive right in. For those who are new to what OCD is about, could you begin by just giving us the way that you see OCD?
Sure. OCD is very different than the general public sees OCD as a superpower for neatness, cleanness, and keeping your hands clean. Um, that is not what OCD is all about. OCD is about having obsessive thoughts, or images or anything that is haunting you in an obsessive way, and then you do compulsions to either neutralize or avoid or try to change whatever it is those obsessions are about. And those compulsive behaviors it could be hand washing, it could be checking, it could be mentally reviewing, it could be trying to replace thoughts you don't like with what you deem a good thought, so that now you've neutralized the maybe scrupulous thought you had a minute ago. So seeking reassurance from other people, all of those kinds of things could be compulsions, plus many others. So when those two get together, you have your obsessions and your compulsions. And I do like to say, because it's often misunderstood, I get a lot of people who have obsessions and compulsions that don't have OCD. It's not that only people with OCD obsess and compulse. And I'll give you a perfect example. Um, my dog, I took him to the vet. They said, this might be cancer. And I said, okay. They said, we're going to go do a test and we'll let you know. And they came back and said, we're not sure. We're going to have to watch this. So, without OCD, for instance, one might obsessively look online or think about losing their dog, or what does this bump mean? How likely is it this breed of dog could die from a bump? Da, 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 all the questions. You could compulsively ask questions about it. You could be doing all kinds of things. And so you could be obsessing and compulsing about something and not have OCD. As well, you just have a situation that makes you want to do this. Maybe you're getting cheated on and now you're checking somebody's phone a lot, or checking online, or trying to figure, am I being cheated on? I mean, a lot of people obsess and compulse. It doesn't mean you have OCD. OCD is very specific, and goes a lot further, and it's not just one instance that causes this. So important to think about. We get a lot of people that come in having a really bad relationship. This is happening. I think I have relationship OCD. I'm like, nope, that's just a bad relationship. You should go see a couples counselor. Oh, okay. Everything is not OCD. So also good to know.
And I imagine there are people with OCD who are in problematic relationships who don't necessarily have obsessions and compulsions when things go wrong.
That's exactly right. And just because you have OCD doesn't mean you have every type of theme. It doesn't mean you'll never get it. It doesn't, maybe you'll never get it. There are themes I've never had. There's themes that repeat themselves. Um, Absolutely. And, you know, that's where you have to have somebody good enough to assess the difference. I've had a handful of people come in and go, I looked online, I have relationship OCD. And I'm looking for the history, like, well, what happened before this relationship? No, I was fine. Oh, well, that sounds like a relationship problem. A tough relationship doesn't cause OCD. That's not how it works. You're obsessing and compulsing, maybe because you're being gaslit. Maybe because it's just not a good relationship. Maybe you're insecure, 100 other things it could be besides OCD. Or you could have OCD and have a relationship problem, and your OCD therapist isn't going to be the one to handle your relationship problem. Probably that's going to be your relationship therapist. So, and we'll manage through the OCD. So,
All right. Well, Tracie, right before we started taping here, we were talking about people with OCD who don't know whether or not the past is as it was.
yes, that's that is a whole doozy right there. Not knowing what happened, trying to figure out what happened, maybe you remember a little bit, but you keep trying to remember. So and that could happen to anyone, even without OCD, by all means. You could be just trying to figure out, did I do something stupid when I was drunk? Maybe I blacked out. That's real. You could do that. Maybe you just don't remember a situation that well, and you're trying to figure it out. But people with OCD sometimes will take something like a real event, like maybe I went camping. Oh, wonderful. And maybe they start becoming concerned. Wait a minute. I wonder if maybe I murdered somebody while I was camping, but maybe I was tired because I did, I don't remember everything about that camping trip. And then we start moving into what can turn into false memory OCD, which is the more your brain tries to figure something out that you don't have information for, your very logical brain likes to try and make it a logical situation. It doesn't make sense to not know what's happening. So it'll start plugging little things in and sometimes big things that may have never happened. Oftentimes it's not the situation. And then next thing you know, like, oh my gosh, I did murder someone on my camping trip. And then you keep thinking about it more. Oh my gosh, I walked to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Maybe did I come across somebody? Remember, I walked by somebody? Did I kill her and bury her maybe and just black out? Or sometimes people have a fear of I am psychotic, or I'm about to be psychotic, or I'm turning psychotic. And oh no, what if that means I was having a psychotic break and at the same time whatever, did something inappropriate, cursed at my minister, whatever it is that you might think, had non-consensual sexual relations with somebody, and now you're calling, did you give consent? Okay, good. And of course, now you're in the compulsive cycle. So something very, very interesting, which is why in terms of ERP, we ask people to stop trying to figure it out because it's just going to create a spider web of confusion. Now you don't know what's real. Now you're like, did this happen? And you're not sure because now you have images or thoughts about it. Well, why would I have these images of it happening if it didn't happen? Well, that's how your brain works. You keep trying to figure it out. It's going to come up with something. And there are a lot of people that end up having to they end up doing treatment on things that aren't real. Imagine that. Um, this happened to me when I was a kid, I think. Oh, okay. Now we're dealing with processing trauma that's not real, didn't actually happen. It's very problematic for people.
I just got the vision of somebody just being in thought prison. How
Yep.
how painful it must be for them and for the people around them.
Absolutely, because when this happens and somebody, comes to you and says, listen, I'm a really bad person, or this other person's a really bad person, guess what happened? And you're like, oh, that sounds really way off base. How could that be? It can be hard to even get somebody to realize like that's not the reality, even though you have images or whatnot. You actually created these. And hard for the people around them who might even be involved in some of that. So, yeah, it can definitely be problematic and painful. Even just watching somebody go through something that they didn't actually need to process because it wasn't real.
So let's say that you see it in your child, because after all, this is a podcast for the parents, not necessarily people who have OCD. What do you do when you think that maybe your child is dealing with false memories, but they don't think so?
That's a great question. As somebody who's dealt with that semi-frequently, I would say it's really hard, but getting somebody who has OCD, no matter how it's showing up, into the right therapy. There are a lot of therapies being advertised as evidence-based that are not. ERP is the gold standard, or exposure response prevention, and I would get somebody in right away to be assessed properly for what's going on and help them get into ERP therapy. And then for you as yourself, just dealing with it. I know my heart is broken about things of that nature with some of my kids dealing with OCD, and taking care of yourself is important as well. I was really thrown off base by something one of my kids said at one point. And I just, I cried, because we have the right to cry and say this is hard. And I'm, the best I could do is talk to my kid about it and say, listen, that's not what actually happened. This isn't a real thing that you're going through. I hope that you don't process this with a therapist, because you're going to have trauma in your baggage that's not even real trauma. You have enough other things that should deal with that are real. But helping your kid to get to some therapy, and all you can do is provide, if it's something you can provide them information about, you can. Arguing with them that it's not real isn't very helpful. I took that route for a minute, and then I was like, listen, your reality is yours. There's treatment. You can do what you want to do with it. And I have to sit on the side and have a broken heart, because I'm a mom watching this happen to somebody that is my kid, who it's very sad, because, I'm an ERP therapist and could very easily get you care for that. But some people, he's an adult. Our children, when they're little, we can do what we want. But when they're adults, it's a little bit harder.
Yeah. Well, Tracie, you had mentioned other sorts of treatment for OCD that are purported to be evidence-based. What are some of those, so we can make sure to avoid them?
Sure. So I'm not going to speak out against any particular things, but what else I will speak to some things. So for instance, talk therapy is harmful. Don't go to talk therapy. Don't go to your usual therapy. Talk therapy can increase the symptoms of OCD and actually make somebody a lot worse. Going to just regular cognitive behavioral therapy, also, while that is an evidence-based practice, for some treatments, it's not very helpful for OCD, because it's based on logic. If I can prove to you that this is not logical, you will stop believing it. And OCD is not a logic disorder. So CBT works really well in some areas, but not with OCD. ERP is in the general umbrella of CBT, but I'm saying that because if you just say, oh, good, this person does cognitive behavioral therapy, they're going to be challenging the reality. And do you have facts to support that? That's just not going to be helpful in treatment. There is, goodness, ICBT, or inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy. And sometimes there are some people that come out and say this is an evidence-based practice, but if you go and you look at the research is mostly on inferential confusion, which is and can be a part of OCD and could be helpful to work through that. But that therapy by itself is not currently considered an evidence-based practice. It's not backed up by the IOCDF or NOCD or any of the people currently using evidence-based treatments. It has some very, very early treatment. It's a newer thing. But really one of the problems with it is that it offers a lot of reassurance. And what we know about reassurance is that reassurance makes OCD worse. So sometimes people will do little parts of that And I'm not saying it's all bad or anything. I'm just saying it's often purported as a current evidence-based treatment that's equal with ERP, and that's just not true because there are no longitudinal studies, there's no meta-analysis, the things that you need to make something evidence-based.
If somebody is interested in ERP, how do they find an ERP practitioner?
Sure. So, one obvious easy way is you can go to treatmyocd.com, where we are at NOCD. We're in all the 50 states and we are in multiple countries as well. And we take most insurance plans, we have payment plans, and we're telehealth. So if you live in the middle of nowhere, we can probably see you. That being said, maybe that's not accessible to you for whatever reason. Maybe your insurance doesn't cover it or whatnot, or you can't, pay for it. In that case, then you just want to probably go to the International OCD Foundation, IOCDF. They have a search where you can look for ERP practitioners. So that could be an option. But what I say is always check, ask questions. As somebody who has tried to find therapists for myself and for my kids over the years, I can tell you that most people, what they're advertising online is not accurate, unfortunately. I was looking for an in-person ERP therapist for an autistic child I was treating who I felt could just really benefit a little bit more from in-person just to keep the engagement. It was a little bit difficult for telehealth, which isn't usual. Usually it works great, but this kid had special needs. And so I went on Psychology Today, where most people go looking, and I called every single therapist in that person's like 100-mile radius that said they offer ERP. And when I called, I said, "Hi, I see you said that you do ERP. Can you talk me through sort of what your process of ERP is?" And the majority of them actually said, "I don't actually do ERP." I got one practitioner who said, "Well, I haven't used it yet, but I'm learning." And that was, I must have called, I kid you not, over 20 people. Some wouldn't answer. And that was the answer from there. "Oh, I treat OCD." Some say, "I'm an OCD specialist." "Oh, I like to call and say, what do you use?" I don't say, "Do you use ERP?" I call, "Hi, I see that you treat OCD. You said you're a specialist. What do you use to treat OCD?" And if they don't answer ERP and they cannot answer that, hey, that means that we're going to face your fears and we are going to learn how to sit in uncertainty, then I just would move on.
This kind of breaks my heart because one of the things that we as families struggle with is this lack of education about what OCD is and what OCD is not. And it seems like we shouldn't have to educate therapists.
That's exactly right. And I want to kind of give some perspective on this. So when we go through grad school as therapists and even at people who are psychiatrists, very rarely is something like a whole entire OCD presentation taught. This is all the ways OCD could show up. And ERP, I have heard of a couple of people who said they got a page on it. But I can tell you, I didn't learn anything about OCD except what everybody else knows as OCD, sort of a germs contamination. Maybe people are obsessive. None of the more taboo themes were mentioned, not in my books, not in my studies, and ERP was never mentioned. And I consistently asked people who were therapists, "Did you learn about what OCD really was? Did you learn about ERP?" And they did not. So even when I came out of grad school and I was seeing people with OCD, it was before I knew ERP existed. And I considered myself a specialist because I learned how to work with young children with OCD, and it just wasn't working because we were taught CBT, just straight CBT will work this out. And I thought, you must be the worst therapist. Your people with OCD don't get better. Also, your own OCD is not so great. I don't know what this is. So I did what I never recommend anyone do because it can be compulsive, which is research. I went on Google or whatever it was at the time. And I put, what is the most effective evidence-based therapy for OCD? And ERP came up. And I was like, what is this? Why don't I know about this? And I had to take it upon myself and pay for myself and put myself through training. And then I started using it about 20-ish years ago. And I had it myself, and then I started treating people and they started getting better. And I was like, this is weird. Why don't they teach this right off the bat? But I also learned about all the additional themes and ways OCD could show up, which was also shocking and informative. Like, oh, that's OCD. Oh, I have OCD in that area. Because I always thought OCD also was just sort of in a contamination OCD box, which I have, and my grandmother has, and my whole family acknowledged that we have that. There was no treatment, but hey, yes, haha, you guys wash things a lot or do weird stuff. Um, but I was able to even just put my entire life into perspective. Oh, that was harm OCD. Oh, this is whatever OCD. It was like shocking. I mean, it was just shocking, just redoing your life through a different lens. It takes, I still do it to this day. Sometimes I find things and I go, wait, that was OCD. I need to process my entire childhood differently than I thought. I used to think I was a murderer and that I was suicidal, and turned out just to be harm OCD. So, and again, because of wrong treatment, wrong diagnoses, misunderstanding, I ended up actually spending 8 years inpatient at nearly 30 different facilities for being suicidal and homicidal when I was neither. So interesting ways that this can come out. And this is why it's important you go to someone who knows what they're talking about, because you could end up, or your child, in more harmful treatment if somebody doesn't know what's going on.
I am so sorry to hear that, Tracie.
Yeah, someday we'll deep dive into that. But yeah, if you can only imagine, if somebody asks your kid, hey, do you have thoughts of harming yourself or others? Yes, both. Thanks for asking and noticing. That's it. It's all you need to go inpatient. If there are no follow-up clarification questions, like someone who knows about OCD, I've had to call psychiatric hospitals to get some of my own patients out who said the words, and they didn't understand that this was actually not something they wanted to do. This is just the thoughts. You didn't ask them, do you really want to do it? Do you have a plan? Well, yeah, sure, I've thought of it. Sure, I have images of it. Oh, well, that just sounds terrifying, right? So very important that you get to the right care for sure, so that you don't get more harm done to you, as I did, which, and again, I'm not sad about it because I learned a lot of things about people with mental illness by living with them in acute and state psychiatric hospitals. So that was interesting.
Ay, ay, ay. Well, I just want to second that. My son had been struggling for years, and we were on the phone one day, and he just casually mentioned, oh, I avoid this certain bridge on campus because every time I go over it, I think about jumping. And it's sort of like, oh my God. And I went
Yes,
through all this. Do you have a plan, just as you said? And I didn't know about harm OCD. And, you know, so that was the event that finally did lead to the diagnosis. But it's scary. It's really scary.
it is scary. And had he been assessed by somebody that didn't know about harm OCD, he probably would have been like me. Oh, we have to keep you safe. And it's very confusing and can actually make you feel, I mean, like I said, I spent almost 8 years, in seclusion rooms being told I was harmful to myself and others, and it's all I could think about. And of course, it's all I could think about because I wasn't being treated for OCD. I'm in a little room, secluded, being told you're suicidal. So, okay, well, that makes sense because you said I am. You're a doctor. The therapist said that. I'm at a hospital. I'm wearing a hospital gown. I can't have any stuff because you said I'll hurt myself. And eventually, you just, as a person with OCD, you can get depressed. You can start to believe these things, which, again, nobody told me it wasn't real. They said it was real. And I became actually suicidal because it was so confusing. I really didn't want to hurt myself. If somebody would have just said, but do you really want to? I go, no, that's why this is so hard. I kept trying to think, how can I do this? But it didn't fit with it's like, that's not what I really want to do, but they keep saying I want to do it. And my thoughts tell me or show me ways to do it. So it must be true. And that's very harmful for somebody to have to struggle with.
How did you escape this whole situation?
Well, it started, gosh, when I was about 10 and a half. So I turned 11 in acute psych and I got out at 18 and a half. I would come out for maybe a week or two at a time here and there, and then they would put me back in. And I would only come out because I knew what words not to say. But I was still very distressed. I'd go home and I would just be afraid, that I was going to kill my father. So I would hide in my room and not come out because I didn't want to hurt my father. And I don't know why I was having thoughts this way. And so I'd end up going in and going in. So when I turned 18, I was at a non-locked facility, a residential facility, and I was finishing out my high school diploma, which, believe me, hospital school does not prepare you for college. Fun fact. Um, and and so I just thought, you know what? I don't know what this is all about, but I know that this is not my life. I don't want this to be my life. I'm 18. I could choose now that I'm not locked down to get myself out of here. So I started talking to, saying all the right things, not saying the OCD things that I didn't know were OCD. Like, just say everything's perfect. I'm great. I don't have any of those thoughts anymore, so that I could get out. And so I just played the game so that I could get out, actually. Um, and then stayed out after that and went to and then I just started college actually 2 weeks later. And I said, I have to become a therapist. One of the things that inspired me while I was in there was I need to be a therapist for kids and teens. I didn't like adults that much at the time. So I said, I'm going to be children and adolescent psychologist or therapist because there is no way that people should be treated this poorly. And mind you, I still didn't know anything about OCD at this point. It was just this was awful and not helpful. So yeah, I just sort of had to figure it out myself. And mind you, my mom is actually a therapist. So she was a therapist since the time I was born, and she missed it. So yeah.
Ouch. Ouch.
Yeah,
Big owie.
for sure.
So, I mean, you need to take care of yourself, right? But
Yes.
at some point, did you ever think about, I've got to go back and educate those people?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I'm so strong in advocacy, especially for taboo topics, I'm known on Instagram as Taboo Tracie because I want everyone to know taboo topics exist. I want people to know OCD is not just hand washing. Um, I do things like podcasts to get the word out there. I post regularly on Instagram. This is OCD. This is what it is. You might be thinking of killing people. That's right. You might have images that are awful. And you can have OCD. Go and also promoting the evidence-based treatments and things of that nature, so that people can get the right help. Because most therapists are talk therapists. That's just true. What is a talk therapist? Just means we're going to talk things out. And this isn't something you can talk out. This is something you need to learn how to behave differently and do different things with your thoughts. And so, yeah, it's really, I started doing ERP about 20 years ago. And one of the other things I do is I work at NOCD as the chief compliance officer, looking to make sure all the things that we're doing are on point. And of course, in my own therapy, I have never stopped being an ERP therapist. I'll probably retire someday and still do ERP therapy because people need it. So yeah, it's just what a rough situation, even for parents. If you're a parent with OCD, that's rough because now it might be attacking your children. You know, you have thoughts about your children. If you don't have it and your children have it, you know, that can be heartbreaking. So just a lot of information that needs to go out there for people so that you go to the right places and not the wrong places. Because I can tell you, I've had well over 50 practitioners diagnose me incorrectly, treat me incorrectly, give me the wrong medications. And that's harmful because you can have your medical record. These things do not disappear. If you look at my medical record from that time, I have diagnoses on there that are so far off. And then you can imagine then the next practitioner you go to sees this diagnosis and they give you medication based on that. Well, that's not even what I need. So now I'm on multiple medications that aren't helping. I'm in therapy that's making it worse. And so it's really tough as a parent to find the right things and to even know what's going on. And then what if you get a wrong diagnosis? I've had plenty of people like me, you know, what's wrong with her? Well, she wants to die. She's very suicidal. Oh, okay. I had never thought of that in my life. What's interesting about that is my harm OCD theme started in a psych eval. So I was fine. I was just a depressed kid with you know, the usual stuff going on. Parents are divorcing and remarrying. And I was just sad. And something happened, and I was just really, really sad. And the therapist I had at that time, my mom called and they said, take her into this local psychiatric hospital. We'll evaluate her. You know, oh, she's crying, she's sad. That was it, by the way. I was just crying and sad. That's all that happened. So we went in and they said, have you ever thought of harming yourself? And my brain, I remember very distinctly, it almost like snapped and it started rolling these harm yourself. What is that? Like, what do you mean? Like, did I pinch myself? Did I, you know, and I'm not asking these questions. I'm just trying to process in my brain at 10 and a half. What are you saying? Harm myself. I don't know what that means. So then I start getting thoughts of different ways someone might harm themselves. And I answer the question, yes, I have had those thoughts. I didn't mention it was just in that moment because you asked and you put, you know, it's don't think of a pink elephant. Oh, whoops, now I'm thinking of a pink. It was that. Um, that sort of thing that happened. And they were, oh, you have? Oh, and do you have a plan for how you would do that? And I was like, no, I don't think I have a plan. Okay, well, we're going to keep her just to make sure she's safe. I ended up staying there for 6 months because when they asked me more questions, well, yeah, sure. Now I'm thinking about it because you asked me, you put the thoughts in my head, and now I'm surrounded by people who actually, a lot of them did have actual suicidality. That's why they were in the hospital. At least I'm assuming that. Some people who had made attempts, there were self-harmers in there, cutters. And I was like, this is what they're talking about. This is what they're talking. And I thought, well, if I'm that, then I'm supposed to be doing those things. And I actually started self-harming because it made sense in that setting and by what they were saying, like, oh, I'm supposed to be harming myself. I have that disorder. Okay. So then I started cutting and doing all these things. So you can just see how one question set a bunch of things up. To go wrong. So it is critical, absolutely critical that you get people to the right assessor, maybe a second opinion even.
Yeah. You mentioned something interesting. You mentioned how once you actually did get the diagnosis of OCD, like you had a new understanding of your past.
So I did. So here's what's kind of interesting. So even as probably a preteen, I heard the word OCD because of my grandmother who washed everything 12 times and did all these other weird contamination things. And I knew that I had some of those same things that I had picked up from her. So I always told people I have OCD. I just meant that. So I even told my practitioners who were evaluating me through the years, I have OCD. It never ended up on my diagnostics. Interestingly, it was only what they decided because they decided, who cares if she's neat and clean? That's amazing, probably. Um, so when I actually had to figure out myself through looking through a DSM that was my mom's on a bookshelf, actually. Oh, well, look at this and look at this. These things are OCD. So I actually sort of found out myself and diagnosed myself. Like I already knew I had OCD. I didn't know those other things were OCD. And I didn't know the right treatment. Even at the time I looked through the DSM and read it and thought, that's weird. Maybe those things are OCD that I have. Um, but still it wasn't something that practitioners took seriously when I would tell them, which was very interesting. So I had to, like I said, I actually didn't get treated properly and figure out what the treatment was until I was 31 years old. And I have had OCD since I was 4. So it was a long time coming,
Mm, mm.
long time coming. And even to this day, maybe every few months I'll remember a situation. And I'll go, wait a minute. And I remember my thinking and what was going on. And I'm like, that was OCD. Nuts. I didn't realize that was OCD. I didn't realize I didn't grow up extremely suicidal and homicidal. That's not what it was. Weird. I don't even know how to process that actually. But it's kind of a relief. But were you? And I'm like, well, I was some of the time. Well, you were because of the wrong treatments and because you were in a situation that would make anybody suicidal after an amount of time being locked up. So it was really interesting.
Plus, a 10-year-old defers to authority, right?
Exactly. And it only makes sense. You go to a new facility, they say the same thing. You go to a new facility, they say the same thing. And they're like, medications aren't working. And oh, and then it's just you're just a hopeless case. Actually, you're not helpable. Like we've tried all the meds, we've tried all the treatments, and you're not helpable. And then that was how I ended up in a state hospital at Camarillo State Hospital, the infamous. I don't recommend it. It's not open anymore, but interestingly enough, yeah, they were like, yeah, just kind of go rot over there. It seems you're not helpable. And they sent me there when I was 15. And there were very severe people in there. And sort of to make it even worse, um, my roommate, she was a murderer. And it was because of psychosis, not because of any other reason. And then imagine what that did to my brain at 15. Oh, I'm in the murderer's room. That makes sense because I also could murder. So that, yep. And they don't care about us. They lock us in together at night because they figure, hey, murderers can just kill each other and that would be fine. I mean, this is how I'm thinking because I don't know any other reason to put somebody with OCD at a state hospital, let alone lock you in with somebody who murders people. Um, so you can just imagine it was just completely, completely nuts, the things that misdiagnosis and mistreatment, what can happen to you. Um, and I was actually there for about 7 months and I got myself out, shockingly. I actually took the hospital to court and I filed a writ of habeas corpus, which is the patient's right that you can do that. And I forced them to show evidence that I had ever done anything that was suicidal or homicidal since my stay. And had I said any of those words, because I had learned not to say those words at that time, and they could not provide evidence and they had to let me out. So I came out, and then my parents put me back in a couple of weeks later to a different place. So that was sort of this revolving, and it's not that I knew I had OCD at that time. It was just, I was like, I have to get out of here. This is crazy. What can I do to get out of here? Like, stop talking about it, stop saying your symptoms, act like everything's fine, see if you can win in court. Maybe you could get out and see your friends.
In the meanwhile, you're left managing your OCD sort of on your own, right?
Correct. And not even knowing, I mean, again, knowing I had OCD, not knowing that these symptoms were. And it was a very dangerous environment because there were a lot of psychotic people in there who were put there for a reason. There were just a lot of people in there doing a lot, and there was a lot of suicidal stuff going on. There was, In all the stairwells, they had a special gate for if you jumped over, it would catch you, so you couldn't die by jumping off of the stairwells. So everywhere you looked, there was some trigger of this is about suicide or this is about homicide. And just what a weird situation to be in when it's not your deal, you know? And I was like, oh, I asked, I remember I was like, why are there those weird gates that don't seem to belong? And they said, oh, I remember the staff, they weren't very nice. And one of them's like, well, that's to keep stupid people like you from jumping and trying to hurt yourself. And you're like, oh, thank you. I love that. And I remember even thinking, like, I might try it though. I might just want to try it and see if that, and then of course, then OCD is like, you should try to jump and see if that could work. Maybe you could jump and miss the fence. Maybe you could jump upside down and break your neck. I mean, that's OCD for you. It's going to come up with other options. That's fine. Jumping isn't the only option. Um, so yeah. And I mean, and you could be going through that personal hell in your bedroom at home with your parents. And that's what's important to realize that this can get really, really bad. Um, I mentioned my homicidal OCD without saying it was OCD at school one day, and I had been out of the hospital for about a month, and I had intrusive thoughts that I might light the school bathroom on fire. But I didn't. I didn't. I mentioned it, and then that got me suspended, and it was like, oh. But I didn't do anything. So even just sharing your intrusive thoughts out loud can cause problems. I appreciate they're trying to save the school, but I didn't have any fire starting things on me. I didn't say, I was just like, I can't stop thinking. And it was very specific. When I go to the bathroom, I look at the toilet paper roll and I think about it on fire. That was actually what I shared. Oh, are you going to light the bathroom on fire? Oh, hadn't thought of that. I just kept thinking about the toilet, like the toilet paper roll going on fire, which turns into now you're a threat to the whole school and the safety of the school. And again, if these people knew what OCD was, they'd go, well, sit with the possibility that you might have a toilet paper roll on fire. Oh, okay, thanks. Appreciate that. That would have been a good ERP intervention as opposed to going to the hospital. And now also you have now you have arson on your, even though I never lit anything. Now I'm a potential arsonist because of my intrusive thoughts. And I can't go to public school. So I mean, it's just very, very misunderstood disorder.
Well, Tracie, I'm so glad that you got out. I'm
Me
so glad
too.
that you're able to take this experience and help other people.
Me too. Yeah. And like I said, I want people to know. I want people to know what this looks like and what it is because the media is just not doing a very good job of sharing, what this is really like. It is a personal hell and torture for some people. And yes, you can also have contamination OCD. I have contamination OCD. And to this day, it disturbs me more than my harm OCD, actually, believe it or not. So even just going, oh, good, you're so neat. No, no, actually, I couldn't use public bathrooms. I wasn't touching money. I was avoiding things. I was doing all kinds of things because of contamination OCD. So don't write off, oh, no big deal. They just like things, in a certain way or to be clean. That can be hell. You could spend your whole day trying to get something just clean enough or just right enough or avoiding all kinds of things and gave myself a bladder infection holding my bathroom while I was at work because I didn't want to use the work bathroom, things of that nature. So it can get all kinds of things. It drives me nuts when people get excited about, oh yeah, I'm a little OCD. I vacuum in special lines or something. I'm like, if you have OCD, I'm sorry to hear that. That must be torture for you. How many hours do you spend doing that? Versus, isn't it funny and cute? Um, which I was getting my nails done a couple months ago, and they were closing up shop and they were vacuuming, and that's exactly what I heard. Oh, she's so funny. Look at her. She always vacuums perfect lines. She's so OCD. And I am big on advocating for teaching in the moment. And I was like, pause. Do you really have OCD? I am so sorry. Is it OCD or you just like to vacuum in lines? Oh yeah, I mean, I like to do that and this. And I was like, I've never heard anyone with OCD say I like before any of the things that they have to do. It's torture. And then I proceeded on a lecture on it could be like this and this and this and this, and there's these different themes, and it's not funny or cute or enjoyable. And of course, that just deadened the room, and probably they were like, she's the worst. But at least four people heard, and I thought if four people heard it for me, whether they accept it or not, I did my job in that moment.
Well, I very much appreciate your sharing this story for the things that you do. If we lay people are just at the nail salon ourselves, what do you recommend that we do?
Sure. I think people are at different comfort levels, obviously, about speaking out publicly. I'm just somebody I have no problem with that. But if you're somebody who doesn't want to do anything about it, you certainly don't have to. But if you feel like that is something, an area of advocacy that you're comfortable doing, it can be helpful telling somebody, hey, that can be offensive to people who actually have OCD because it's not really a fun, cute disorder. It's torture. And I just wanted to share that with you in this moment because it can be hurtful. Because you wouldn't say that, I have a little bit of schizophrenia. Isn't that funny? Because I think illogically at times. I don't hear people saying that because everybody knows schizophrenia is not funny or cute or helpful. And I really want people to know, even if you just say, did you know that OCD, according to the World Health Organization, is in the top 10 most debilitating mental disorders? And then maybe even that piece of information might help somebody. Um, but just like anything else, somebody saying a racial slur or anything else, you hear something and it feels gross to you, feel free to use that moment to educate somebody.
Tracie, if somebody is in that hell of unmanaged OCD, they should do what?
They should immediately, if not sooner, get some help. You could go to treatmyocd.com and get a free consultation at NOCD for ERP therapy. We treat kids as young as 5 all the way up. And we also treat other disorders these days. But so maybe you have depression and OCD. We could do both of those. And just make sure you stay on look at viable websites and viable things like the International OCD Foundation or NOCD or places that make sense, and don't just believe it. Somebody says this is evidence-based or I'm a specialist. Don't believe it. Ask questions. Always ask questions, because if you believe it, you might end up with a talk therapist who does you some harm.
All right. Well, thank you again. I very much appreciate your sharing this.
Absolutely. I love coming and talking to y'all.
So, friend, if you'd like to follow Tracie on Instagram, I will leave her handle below. I'll also leave a link to NOCD. So, thank you, friends, for listening. Remember, you got this.